The bell above the door rang, the same little brass bell I'd hung there 20 years ago when the store first opened. I walked in like I did every morning, coffee in one hand, my old blue apron in the other, the one Margaret sewed my name onto before she passed. Carter's Market, the sign outside still read. My market. Or so I thought. Morning, son, I said, heading toward the counter. Let's get the register started before the weekend rush. But he didn't smile back. Ben was standing behind the counter in a crisp white polo shirt, the kind consultants wear when they think image sells better than sincerity. The register was spotless, the shelves lined with bottled smoothies instead of the glass Coke bottles I used to stock. Even the old wooden counter had been replaced with stainless steel. It looked more like a boutique than a neighborhood grocery. Dad, he started, rubbing the back of his neck, we need to talk. That tone, calm, businesslike, rehearsed, I'd used it myself in tougher conversations. My stomach tightened. What about? I asked. He looked around the store, as if searching for the right words. About, stepping back. Letting me handle things. I chuckled. You already handle things, Ben. I'm just here to help. He shook his head. No, Dad. I mean really handle it. Alone. I froze. What's that supposed to mean? He sighed and crossed his arms, like a man preparing to close a deal. Times have changed. The store's doing well online, the brand's growing, but, you're stuck in the old way. The apron, the small talk, the credit notes you keep in that notebook, it's not professional anymore. You're hurting the image. I laughed, thinking it was a bad joke. The image? Son, this isn't a tech startup. It's a grocery store. But he didn't laugh. I'm serious, Dad. From now on, I'll handle the register and the front. You should take it easy. Maybe stay home. The words hung in the air, heavy and final. Take it easy. Stay home. I looked around the place, the scuffed floor I'd mopped myself for years, the corner where Ben used to do his homework while I worked late, the ceiling fan that still wobbled because he'd once thrown a baseball inside. Every inch of it carried our history. And now he was telling me I didn't belong here. He must have seen my face, because his tone softened. It's not personal, Dad. It's just, business. Business. That word hit harder than any insult could have. Business was what I built this place on, but it was never just business to me. It was my life, my pride, the place that fed my family and gave my son a future. I slipped the apron over my arm, smoothing its faded fabric. All right, Ben, I said quietly. If that's how you see it. I turned toward the door, the bell chiming again as I stepped outside into the bright morning air. Behind me, I heard him lock the register, like sealing a chapter one hadn't finished reading. The sign above the door still had my name on it, but for the first time, it didn't feel like mine anymore. Tell me where you're watching from, and hit like if you've ever built something with your own hands, only to be told it was time to step aside. Before that morning, before the words, "It's just business," turned my stomach to stone, Carter's Market wasn't just a store. It was the rhythm of my life, the smell of fresh bread at dawn, the chatter of neighbors who stopped by not just to buy, but to belong. When I first opened the place, the year was 2003. The world was still slow enough for people to talk to each other. I'd left my job at a warehouse after 20 years, took every dollar Margaret and I had saved, and bought an old corner shop on Jefferson Street. The roof leaked, the freezer hummed like a dying tractor, and the floorboards creaked like they were telling me to turn back. But I didn't. Margaret painted the windows herself, hand-lettering Carter's Market, fresh goods, honest prices in red and white. Ben was 10 at the time, a scrawny kid with big ears and bigger curiosity. I still remember him sitting on a pile of empty soda crates, pretending to ring up invisible customers with a toy calculator. In those early years, business was survival. I woke up before sunrise to pick up produce from the farmer's co-op and stayed open until the last customer left, even if it was just old Mrs. Walters buying milk and talking about her cat. Margaret would bring sandwiches around noon, and we'd eat on milk crates out back, hands still dusted with flour or receipt ink. We didn't have much, but we had purpose. And slowly, people started coming. Word got around that Carter's Market wasn't like the big chains. I let people run tabs when times were tight. I remembered birthdays, kids' names, favorite brands of coffee. Folks came because they knew they mattered here. Ben grew up between those aisles. He learned to count using the register keys, to weigh apples, to make change. When he was old enough, he helped stock shelves, carried boxes, and learned to greet customers with that easy Carter smile his mother had. Margaret used to say, "This store will be his inheritance, not just the building, but the way you treat people." But then Margaret got sick. Cancer. Fast and cruel. The year she passed, I almost closed the shop. The lights stayed off for a week, and I sat alone behind the counter, listening to the hum of the old refrigerator like it was mocking me. But it was Ben who convinced me to reopen. "Mom wouldn't want this to die with her," he said. And so, I kept going. For her. For him. After college, he came back home, with big dreams, business ideas, and a laptop full of marketing plans. "Dad, we can take this online," he said. "We'll modernize. Delivery, social media, loyalty programs. We'll make it big." I didn't understand half of what he said, but I trusted him. The world was changing, and maybe the store needed to change with it. We updated the logo, painted the walls, replaced the creaky shelves. I let him make most of the decisions. He had the education I never did. At first, it worked. Sales went up. We even got a write-up in a local paper, "Father and Son Modernize a Community Landmark." I was proud. Margaret would have been too. But then, somewhere along the way, the soul of the store started slipping through the cracks. The handwritten, "Thank you," sign by the register was replaced with a digital tip screen. The old candy jars were gone, replaced by pre-packaged snacks with QR codes. And the regulars, the ones who'd been with us through every season, started coming less. "Ben, people don't come here for branding," I told him once. "They come here because it feels like home." He'd smiled politely, the way young men do when they think their fathers are out of touch. "Dad, sentiment doesn't pay rent. Efficiency does." He didn't see that rent was never the point. The point was belonging. So when he told me to stay home, that I was ruining the image, it wasn't just losing a job. It was losing my place in the world I built. The store wasn't just four walls and a cash register, it was where my life happened. Where Margaret's laughter still echoed when the doorbell rang. Where my son learned to be a man. And now, that same son was telling me there was no room for me anymore. That night, I drove by the store. The lights were brighter than I ever kept them, the shelves perfectly aligned. But through the glass, it looked empty, not of people, but of heart. I sat there a long time, engine running, apron still folded on the passenger seat. He might have thought he was running a business. But I knew what he'd really done. He'd taken a piece of his father's soul, and traded it for a logo. The morning I drove past and saw the new sign, I nearly ran the red light. It was early, the kind of Virginia dawn where the fog still hugged the road and the air smelled faintly of bread from the bakery 2 doors down. Carter's Market had always been a comfort to look at in that hour, the painted windows Margaret had done by hand, the small neon "Open" sign that glowed like a heartbeat. But that day, something was different. The windows were spotless, too spotless. The hand-painted letters were gone, replaced by sleek, machine-cut vinyl that read. "The Market, fresh. Modern. Local. No Carter. No family name. No trace of me." I parked right there, half on the curb, and just stared. My son, my own flesh and blood, had erased me with a single design choice. When I walked in, I could smell the faint sting of paint and cleaning solution. The bell was gone too, replaced by a digital door sensor that chirped instead of ringing. A customer was at the counter, someone I didn't recognize, paying with their phone while Ben smiled that new, polished smile of his. He saw me and froze. "Dad," he said, sounding caught between guilt and irritation. "What happened to the sign?" I asked. My voice came out low, too steady to sound calm. He straightened up. It was time for a change. The old one looked dated. People want clean branding now, something that speaks to a broader audience. Broader audience? I stepped closer. Ben, this store was the audience. These people out here, Mrs. Walters, the Bennetts, the kids who used to buy penny candy, they're the reason you're standing here. And that name, your mother painted that with her own hands. You think customers cared about the font? "Dad, please," he said, glancing at the customer still lingering by the door. "Not here." But I wasn't listening anymore. I looked around, the self-checkout tablet, the espresso machine in the corner, the chalkboard that now listed artisan wraps instead of ham sandwiches. It all felt sterile, like a showroom trying to impersonate warmth. He reached out, maybe to calm me, maybe to move me aside. "It's not personal. It's business." That line again. Those same 4 words that people use when they want to stab your heart and pretend it's a handshake. "You know," I said quietly, "when your mother and I opened this place, I told her we'd name it after our family so that no matter what happened, our name would stand for something honest. And now, it's just the market. A name that could belong to anyone." He sighed. "Dad, people don't care about nostalgia. They want clean lines, easy service, a good story." "And what story are you telling now?" I cut in. "Because it sure as hell isn't ours." He didn't answer. He didn't have to. His silence was the final verdict. I took off my apron, the same one I'd worn for 20 years, and laid it on the counter. "You win, Ben," I said. "You've got your brand. You don't need your father standing in the way." I started toward the door, but paused just long enough to look back. "I built this place from nothing," I said. "But I guess nothing's what I am here now." Outside, the morning sun had climbed higher, washing the glass front in gold. I stood there a long time, watching the reflection of the new sign shimmer against the window, the market. It looked clean. It looked modern. And it looked dead. That night, I drove past again. The lights glowed bright, and a line of customers snaked out the door. Maybe he was right, I thought bitterly. Maybe people didn't care who owned the store, just that they could tap their phones and get what they wanted. But as I sat there, I saw something small and quiet that Ben didn't. Mrs. Walters, our oldest customer, was standing on the sidewalk, staring at the new sign. She frowned, hesitated, and then turned away without going in. That's when it hit me, the name didn't just belong to me. It belonged to them too. To everyone who'd ever trusted that Carter's meant something human. And as that realization sank in, something inside me hardened into resolve. He could have the building, the website, the fancy machines. But he couldn't take the heart out of a name, not while I was still breathing. I went home, dug out my old notebook of credit tabs and suppliers' numbers, and turned to a blank page. At the top, I wrote, "Carter's Market, reopened soon." I spent the next few weeks driving around with a notebook full of names, prices, and half-formed ideas, like a man chasing the ghost of something he'd already built once before. I didn't tell anyone what I was doing, not even Laura, my daughter who lived 2 towns over. Pride's a funny thing, even when you've been knocked down, you don't want to explain the bruises. One morning, I saw it, an old standalone shed for rent at the corner of Maple and 6th, 2 blocks from the market. It used to be a flower shop. Now it was just dust and silence. The landlord, a gray-haired woman named Rose, looked at me like she recognized something in my face, a kind of stubbornness she'd probably seen in her own father. "You sure you want this place?" she asked. "No running water, no fancy signage, no space." I smiled. "Sounds perfect." By the end of the week, I had the key. I cleaned it myself, swept out the leaves, scrubbed the counters, patched the window where a rock had cracked the glass years ago. The floor creaked, and the old bulbs buzzed, but I didn't mind. I brought in a second-hand cooler, 2 shelves, and my old cash register, the one with the sticky 7 key and the drawer that jammed unless you smacked it just right. It was slow, noisy, and beautifully honest. Then I went to my storage shed and dug out the old wooden sign. The one Margaret painted in our first year. Carter's Market, fresh goods, honest prices. The paint was chipped, the letters fading, but it still had her brushstrokes, her touch. I wiped it clean and hung it above the door with a single nail. No neon, no slogans, no branding agencies, just the truth. The day I opened, I didn't even advertise. I just turned the sign in the window to open and waited. At first, nobody came. Hours passed. I sat behind the counter with a thermos of coffee, listening to the old fridge hum. I was almost ready to close early when the bell jingled. Mrs. Walters stepped inside. She looked older than I remembered, slower in her walk, smaller somehow, but her smile was the same. "Heard you were back," she said. "Couldn't stomach those self-checkouts next door. Makes me feel like I'm talking to a wall." I grinned. "Here, the wall talks back." She laughed and set a few groceries on the counter. I wrote her total in my old notebook. "Running a tab?" she asked. "Of course," I said. "You've been good for it 30 years. Why stop now?" That was how it began. Word spread faster than I expected. Old customers trickled in, one by one, some out of nostalgia, others out of quiet rebellion. They came for the coffee that didn't cost $6, for the stories, for the way I still remembered their names. "Morning, Sam," I'd say as the delivery guy dropped off bread. "How's your knee, Martha?" "Your boy get that scholarship, Tom?" Within a month, I had a line some mornings. Not long, not fancy, but steady. Across the street, I'd sometimes see Ben standing at his window, arms crossed, watching. He never came in. But I could feel the weight of his gaze, the confusion in it. His store was bigger, brighter, flashier, but it was starting to look emptier. One afternoon, a delivery driver I used to hire stopped by. "You're making waves, Mr. Carter," he said. "Your boy's been running promotions all week, discounts, social media ads, giveaways. Still not bringing the old crowd back." I just smiled. "He's selling products," I said. "I'm just selling trust." The next weekend, something remarkable happened. A family I didn't recognize came in, a young couple with 2 kids. "Our neighbor told us this is where the good fruit is," the man said. I handed the little girl a red apple from the bin. "First one's always on the house," I told her. She bit into it and grinned. Her mother smiled. "Feels like the stores my grandfather used to take me to," she said. "Thank you." After they left, I stood there, looking at the sunlight spilling across the counter. It felt like Margaret was standing right there beside me, whispering, "See? You built something real." But I'd be lying if I said it was all peace and joy. Running a store again at 68 wasn't easy. My back ached. My knees popped every time I bent to lift a crate. And the rent, even for that small place, ate through my savings. Some nights, I'd sit with my ledger and see the numbers not adding up. I'd think about how easy it would be to just quit, to admit that maybe Ben was right. Maybe the world didn't have room for men like me anymore. Then I'd look at the sign, at Margaret's faded handwriting, and I'd remember why I couldn't stop. Because this wasn't about money. It was about dignity. About the promise that an honest handshake still meant something, even in a world obsessed with clicks and logos. And every time I unlocked that door in the morning, I knew I was keeping that promise, not just to myself, but to everyone who ever believed Carter's still meant something. By the time spring rolled in, word about the old Carter's Market had spread beyond Jefferson Street. Folks started calling it Carter's Corner, even though the sign still bore the original name. The name wasn't what mattered. It was what came with it, a handshake, a memory, a little bit of the world before everything turned plastic and polite. Every morning, I'd open at 6. By 7:30, the same familiar faces were filing in, truck drivers grabbing coffee, school teachers picking up fruit, widows who came less to shop than to talk. They'd lean on the counter while I wrapped their bread in brown paper and ask, "How's that back of yours, Mr. Carter?" Or, "You still using that old register?" And I'd laugh, tapping the sticky 7 key until the drawer sprang open like it always had. The sound of coins hitting that metal tray felt better than any sales graph. Business wasn't booming, but it was breathing. And more importantly, it was honest. I didn't have an online presence, but I had something far better, word of mouth. A kind of loyalty you can't buy with discounts or loyalty cards. One afternoon, I was restocking apples when I noticed a young woman taking photos of the stall. She looked maybe 25, bright-eyed and curious. "Mind if I post this on my food blog?" she asked. "Go right ahead," I said, wiping my hands on my apron. She smiled. "This place feels real. Like people still matter here." A few days later, a couple of college students showed up. Then a reporter from the Richmond Herald. Apparently, that photo had made the rounds online. Old school grocer keeps community spirit alive. The story called me the man who still knows your name. I didn't think much of it until customers started coming from outside town, folks who'd seen the article, who wanted to see if the old-fashioned man with the notebook was real. When I told them I still kept credit tabs, they laughed like I'd told them a fairy tale. But they bought something anyway, a jar of honey, a loaf of bread, and left with a smile. That's when I realized, Ben had been chasing reach, but I had found roots. A few weeks later, I was restocking when a shadow crossed the counter. "Busy, huh?" I turned around. Ben stood there, hands in his pockets, wearing that same crisp polo, but his eyes looked different, tired, uncertain. "Business good?" I asked, keeping my tone neutral. He nodded once. "It's fine." Which meant it wasn't. He glanced around, taking in the shelves, the old cash register, the customers laughing near the counter. "So this is what you've been doing?" "This," I said, "and sleeping better at night." He ran a hand through his hair. "You're undercutting me, Dad." I blinked. "Undercutting you? You're selling the same stuff, but cheaper. People are saying you'll give them credit, or let them pay next week. You can't run a business like that, it's bad practice." I leaned on the counter, folding my arms. "Son, I don't sell on credit because it's good practice. I do it because it's good people." He sighed. "That's not sustainable." "It sustained us for 20 years. Ben's eyes dropped. "You're making me look bad, Dad. My employees say customers are asking where you went. They think I pushed you out." I looked at him for a long moment, then said quietly, "You didn't push me out, Ben. You just forgot where you came from." He didn't respond. Just nodded stiffly and walked out. After that, business grew even faster, not because I wanted it to, but because people wanted something to believe in. I hired 2 part-timers, both retired factory workers who knew every family in town. They didn't need training, they'd lived the same values I had. We put out a hand-painted sign on the corner. "Real food. Real people. Carter's Market." No logos. No slogans. Just a reminder. It was around that time that the small miracles began, little things I hadn't planned but that changed everything. One customer, a local teacher, asked if she could host her class here to learn how businesses used to be. Then the high school newspaper came by for an interview. Soon after, an economics professor from the community college started using Carter's Corner as an example in her lectures, a living model of ethical small business. Meanwhile, across town, Ben's modern market was struggling. The shine had worn off. His social media rebrand hadn't stuck, and people had grown tired of the sterile experience. They didn't want QR codes. They wanted connection. And that was something money couldn't buy. I never gloated. I never wanted revenge. I just kept doing what I'd always done, opening early, staying late, remembering faces. But I did notice something one morning. As I was opening shop, I saw Ben sitting in his car across the street, watching. He didn't come in. He just sat there, engine idling, as if trying to understand how his old man, with no website, no consultants, no hashtags, had won back the heart of the town. The truth was simple, he'd built a business, I'd built belonging. And belonging, I realized, was the strongest brand in the world. That night, as I locked up, I looked up at Margaret's old sign glowing under the street lamp and smiled. The paint was cracked, the wood weathered, but it had survived storms, literal and otherwise. The world could keep spinning faster if it wanted. I'd be right here, steady as the hand that painted that name so long ago. The plan had never been to compete. The plan was to remember. And that memory was turning into a movement. It was late August, the kind of thick, humid Virginia evening when the air felt heavy enough to drink. The sun had just dipped behind the buildings, throwing long orange shadows across Maple Street. I was wiping down the counter, humming an old tune Margaret used to play on the radio, when I heard the door creak open. I didn't even need to look up. I knew that gait, confident once, now slower, uncertain. "Hey, Dad." I turned around. Ben stood in the doorway, dressed not in his usual crisp polo but a wrinkled t-shirt and jeans. His hair was longer, his eyes tired. He looked older, not in years, but in spirit. "Evening, son," I said, rinsing a rag in the sink. "We're just about closed." He gave a small laugh. "Yeah, I figured." He looked around the shop, taking in the jars, the old register, the familiar smell of coffee and sawdust. "Still smells the same. Some things don't need changing." He nodded and stepped closer, running a hand over the counter, the same counter where, years ago, he'd learned to count change. "It's smaller than I remembered," he said softly. "Places grow or shrink depending on what you bring to them," I said. "This one stayed the same because the people didn't." He didn't answer at first. Just stood there, hands in his pockets, staring at the floor. "Dad, my store's closing." I didn't flinch. I'd known this was coming. You can tell when a business has lost its heartbeat long before the walls come down. "I'm sorry to hear that," I said simply. He looked up, half expecting a jab or a smirk. I gave him neither. "I don't know what happened," he said, voice cracking a little. "We had everything, branding, marketing, investors. But after that article about you came out, people stopped showing up. They said the new place didn't feel like Carter's anymore. That's because it wasn't." He winced. "Yeah," he whispered. "I see that now." For a long moment, the only sound was the buzz of the old refrigerator. Then he said quietly, "You know what the worst part is? I thought I was protecting what you built. I thought if I modernized it, made it look cleaner, more professional, that it would last longer. But somewhere in there, I stopped hearing people. I started seeing customers instead." I leaned on the counter, crossing my arms. "You didn't build a store, Ben. You built a stage. And people can feel the difference. A stage looks good, but it doesn't hold a soul." He nodded, staring down. "You were right," he said. "About everything." "No," I said softly. I was just stubborn. You were ambitious. The truth was somewhere in the middle. But you forgot something your mother taught us both, that people don't come back for prices or signs. They come back for faces. His eyes glistened, and he wiped them quickly. I let her down, he murmured. You let yourself down, I said gently. Your mother would have just told you to get back up. He looked at me then, really looked, like a son seeing his father not as competition, but as the compass he'd been missing. Dad, he said slowly, I can't do this alone anymore. I don't even know if I want to. I miss being part of something that meant something. I thought about Margaret, about the years of sweat and laughter and struggle that had built our little store from nothing. And I thought about how much of that was now standing in front of me, waiting for forgiveness he didn't even have to ask for. I walked around the counter, wiped my hands on my apron, and put a hand on his shoulder. You never stopped being part of it, I said. You just lost sight of what it was. He swallowed hard. What do I do now? I smiled faintly. Well, for starters, you show up tomorrow at 7. The bread truck's late half the time, and I could use a younger back to unload the crates. His brow furrowed. You mean? I mean, I could use a good salesman. One who remembers how to smile without a script. Ben laughed, really laughed, for the first time in years. Dad, after everything I did, you'd still hire me? I shrugged. I've forgiven worse customers for bouncing checks. He shook his head, smiling through wet eyes. You really don't quit, do you? No, I said, patting his back. And now, neither do you. We stood outside for a moment after I locked up. Across the street, the lights of the market still glowed faintly, though I knew it wouldn't last much longer. Ben followed my gaze. I should probably take the sign down, he said quietly. Feels wrong to leave it up. Leave it, I said. Let it remind folks that even good ideas can lose their way. Besides, every town needs a ghost or two. He nodded, understanding. The crickets were loud that night. A warm breeze rustled the faded banner above Carter's Market, and I caught Ben glancing at it, the name he'd once erased, now hanging proud and worn. He smiled. You were never old-fashioned, Dad. I looked at him. No. I was just real. Turns out that never goes out of style. We walked home together under the amber streetlights, quiet, side by side, not as boss and employee, not even as father and son for a moment, but as two men who had both lost and found something in each other again. Sometimes, confrontation doesn't need shouting. Sometimes it's just the sound of a heart learning to listen again. The next morning, Ben showed up right at 7, just like he said he would, coffee in one hand, his sleeves rolled up like he was ready to work. It was strange seeing him there again, standing under the old wooden sign Margaret had painted, looking smaller somehow, more human. For a second, I saw the boy he used to be, the one who'd run down these same aisles with a grin and a clipboard twice his size. He glanced at me and smiled sheepishly. So, where do I start? I tossed him a broom. You know, there's a secret to this job, I said. Start with the floors. Keeps a man humble. He laughed, but he didn't argue. He swept. He restocked shelves. He even learned to ring the register again, the same one he once tried to replace with a touchscreen. By noon, his shirt was damp with sweat and his smile was real. Forgot how hard this was, he said, catching his breath. It's not hard, I replied, sorting receipts. It's honest. Little by little, the rhythm returned, not just to the store, but to us. We worked side by side, barely talking at first, just sharing the quiet understanding that comes when words aren't needed. And it didn't take long before people started noticing. Customers who hadn't been in for years began trickling back in, surprised to see us together. Well, I'll be, said Mrs. Walters one afternoon. The Carters reunited. I thought I'd never see the day. Ben smiled at her. Guess I missed the place too much. Or maybe, she said with a wink, it missed you. The word spread fast. Folks loved the story, the father and son who'd fallen out and found their way back again. Someone even took a picture of us behind the counter and posted it online with the caption, "The old Carter's Market, back where it belongs." It got shared hundreds of times, and before long, there was a steady crowd every weekend. We didn't plan for it. We didn't need to. The store had become what it was always meant to be, not a brand, not a business, but a story people wanted to feel part of. One afternoon, as we were closing, I caught Ben standing by the sign out front, running his fingers over the chipped paint. "Mom would like this, wouldn't she?" he said quietly. "She'd love it," I replied. "But she'd tell you not to stare at the sign too long. She always said a store's not about its name, it's about the faces inside." He nodded, eyes glistening. "I forgot that for a while." "That's all right," I said. "The world's loud these days. Makes people forget simple things." He smiled. "Well, I think we're reminding them." And he was right. A month later, Carter's Market had more customers than ever, not because we changed anything, but because we hadn't. Kids came in for penny candy again. Old friends lingered just to chat. We even brought back the handwritten "thank you" sign by the door. Ben started remembering names too, really remembering. "Good to see you, Mrs. Clayton. How's your garden?" or "that peach pie last week. Best I've ever had." The words came natural, like they'd just been waiting for the noise to quiet down. One night, after we closed, he turned to me and said, "You know, Dad. I used to think you were stuck in the past. Now I see you were just protecting something I was too young to understand." "What's that?" I asked. "The part of a business that isn't about selling," he said. "The part that's about belonging." I smiled, leaning on the counter. "That's what your mother taught me. And I guess now, you too." We started calling it the second opening, half jokingly, but the name stuck. It wasn't a relaunch or a rebrand, it was a return. The sign stayed the same, but we added one small thing beneath it, a hand-painted wooden plank that read, "Established 2003. Reborn 2024. Ben made it himself." When he hung it up, he said, "I don't want people to think we went backward, Dad. I want them to know we just came home." I didn't say a word. I didn't need to. As I locked the door that night, I looked at the reflection of our names in the window, not the name on the sign, but the one smiling back in the glass. Father and son. Builder and builder again. Carter's wasn't a store anymore. It was proof that you could lose everything, even your own name, and still find it again if you held on to what was real. It's been a year since Ben came back. The paint on the new sign has faded a little, the way good things do when they've seen weather and work. Every morning, I still get to the store first, old habits die hard, but these days, Ben's never far behind. He brings the coffee, unlocks the register, and greets the early customers by name. I watch him sometimes from behind the counter, the way he talks to people, the way he listens. It's not rehearsed anymore. There's no script, no brand pitch. Just a man remembering what it means to be part of a community. One Saturday, a young couple came in. The woman smiled at Ben and said, "Your father's store reminds me of my granddad's place. It feels real." Ben looked at me and smiled. "Yeah," he said softly. "That's kind of our thing." Later, after closing, we sat out front on old milk crates, the summer air warm and quiet. The neon light flickered faintly above us, catching the curve of the hand-painted letters, Carter's Market. "You ever think about selling?" Ben asked suddenly. I chuckled. "Every day for 20 years. But I never found a buyer who could afford it." He smiled. "Because it's not for sale?" "Because it's not just mine," I said. It belongs to everyone who's ever walked through that door. He nodded, thoughtful. I used to think a brand was about how it looked. Now I know it's about how it feels. Exactly, I said. A logo fades. But a handshake, that stays with you. We sat there a while longer, watching the last bit of sunlight disappear behind the rooftops. The street was quiet, the kind of quiet that only comes when everything is in its right place. Before we went inside, I looked at him and said, "You know, son, I don't need you to run this place like I did. Just promise me one thing, don't ever let it stop being human." He smiled, eyes shining in the lamplight. "I promise, Dad." I nodded. Then Carter's will never die. As I locked the door, I caught our reflection in the glass, two Carters, side by side, the old and the new, both part of the same story. And for the first time in a long time, I felt that Margaret's laughter was still in the walls, echoing softly through the aisles. Because some legacies aren't built on profits or signs, they're built on the hands that pass change, the names we remember, and the hearts we refuse to forget.